All right, thank you so much for joining. Sarah, so good to see you. Hello. Welcome, welcome. Happy Wednesday afternoon. So this again is our Spotlight Introduction to Equity-Centered Design Thinking. We take the approach of looking at design thinking, which is a common practice and process, through an equity lens. And so that's the approach that we use here at MindSpark Learning. This spotlight its purpose is to give you a sneak peek into our equity-centered design thinking work. And ultimately, we have an institute that's offered this summer. So I'll talk more about that at the end of our session together. But thank you all so much for joining. Just really quick, if you're able to turn on your camera, which looks like both of you are, which is awesome, please leave it on. It makes it more interactive and engaging. You will be automatically muted, and that is just to eliminate background noise, but please feel free to unmute yourself at any point throughout today's session. If you need help at any point, please feel free to keep an eye, or type into the chat. My colleague Sam is here joining us today. He will keep an eye on the chat and answer any questions that you have. And then when you're in breakout rooms, you will see a countdown timer in the upper right-hand corner. Just pay attention to that, because sometimes we will abruptly take you out of that breakout room and we never want to cut anyone off. So pay attention to that timer. My name is Kiki Huckabee. I'm the Senior Director of Innovative Practices here at MindSpark Learning. I'm super excited to engage in this work with you all today. And from our office. So this is pretty exciting. We've been working from home for the last year, and we're starting slowly to trickle back into the office. So very, very exciting things happening. I want to introduce you all to our cognitive approach to problem solving and design. So this is our framework for any professional development that we do. And the purpose of this is really, we want to not only provide unique experiences for our clients, but also we really believe in pushing the boundaries of education, thinking about things innovatively. And so sometimes that starts with a little disruption, right? I know as teachers, we love to have all the answers to things, but sometimes it's great to get outside of our comfort zone and just dive right in. And so that is what we're going to do today. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about what equity-centered design thinking is. I am just going to throw you in it and have you work through it and learn by doing. So that is our approach in today's session. So with that being said, Sam is putting a link to our graphic organizer into the chat. It will force you to make a copy of that graphic organizer, but then it is yours. So you can edit it, take notes, add anything you want to add, delete anything you want to delete. It is yours. So make a copy of that. I'm not able to share my whole slide deck with you, but that does have very important slides, especially as we do breakout group work later on. So make sure you make a copy of that and follow along as needed. So like I said, we're going to jump right into an equity-centered design thinking sprint. And so we are going to explore and solve this question. How might we help reduce the 1.3 billion tons of food wasted every year? All right. That is your goal. You're solving this monumental problem today. So this is our driving question. And we are just going to jump right in and engage in a little activity. So Sam is going to rename both of you. He's going to rename you. He's going to rename one of you with the number 1 in front of your name. And if you have the number 1 in front of your name, you represent 1.2 billion of the world's population. Okay, so you represent 12% of the world's population. You live in a country with a very high level of development. You have money to spare, you consume the majority of the world's food, and your life expectancy is about 77 to 83 years old. Okay, so Brian, it looks like you are this profile. You are number 1. All right, now I'm gonna Sam, have you hold off on renaming anyone for this slide. So because we don't have enough people today, I'm gonna break it up. Normally, people would be renamed 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they would represent 2.6 billion of the world's population, which is about 40% of the world. They live in a country with low development and are vulnerable to poverty. They have no savings or government support systems, okay? Here's our next persona. So again, Sam, I'm gonna have you hold off from naming anyone on this slide. But again, if we had more people, we would rename them 6, 7, and 8. They would represent 34% of the world's population. They would live on about $2 per day. They're frequently hungry, vulnerable to illness, and many of their children do not attend secondary school. Okay, so that's that persona. Lastly, Sarah, Sam is going to rename you with a 9 in front of your name. So you are going to be number 9. And Sarah, you are representing 1 billion of the world's population. So about 14%. You live on less than $1.25 a day, largely undernourished and sick. Majority of this population will die before the age of 5 and not attend school and or work in dangerous conditions. Okay, so that is your persona. And here is the activity that we are going to engage in. So both in your graphic organizer and in the chat, Sam is putting in a link to something that looks like, where is it? All right, let me pull it over. It's on my other screen here. So here's what you're gonna do. When you click on that link in the chat, and I'll pull it up in just a second, you are going to click on the number that is associated in front of your name. So Brian, you're 1, Sarah, you're 9. So go ahead and click on that number. And when you click on that number, you'll notice that it brings up kind of a card to describe your persona a little bit in more detail. So I will just show that right here. So Sarah, or excuse me, Brian, when I click on you, it brings up a persona for person number 1. So this is more details about who you are, Brian. So you are a male, you are 47 years old, you have a fixed occupation, you work in technology, you went to college, you have 2 dependents, you have no illnesses or handicaps, and you are a native language speaker. All right, so that is your persona. Sarah, you are going to click on number 9, and that is going to bring up your persona. So Sarah, you are a male, you are 16 years old, you are a farmer, and you do not have a fixed income. So what that means is that you are work off of an hourly rate, right? If you were to get sick or take vacation, you don't get paid for those things. Your education level is 2nd grade, you have 1 dependent, you have asthma, and you are a non-native language speaker. All right, so have your persona in mind, and here's what we're going to do. On this slide, I am going to read a couple statements. If the statement is true to you, you are going to click on your little number, and you are going to move it with your arrows as the easiest on your computer. You are going to move it 1 space if it applies to you. Okay, we'll do an example together. So I'm going to read a couple statements. If it's true for you, you're going to move 1 space. Your goal is to get to this bounty of food at the end. So we're going to see if anyone makes it there. All right, here we go. So here's the first statement. The first one is, if you are a male, move forward 1 space. And again, this is your persona. Awesome, so it looks like Sarah moved forward, and Brian, if you're able to click on that number 1 and move it forward with your arrows. Brian, are you able to click on it? Okay. Brian, I will move it for you. Does that sound okay? Okay, but you may have to help me with your persona a little bit. All right, here's the next statement. If you are between 18 and 70 years old, move forward 1 space. Brian, I believe that's you, right? Awesome. All right, Brian, I'm going to move you. Sarah, looks like you're staying put. If your job gives you a fixed salary, for example, teaching or serving as a state employee, move forward 1 space. Brian, you're fixed. Awesome, I'm moving you one space. Here is the next statement. If your level of education is more than 3rd grade, move forward one space. Brian, I think that's you, college educated. All right. If you do not have dependents, move forward one space. Both of you have dependents. All right, if you have more than 3 dependents, move backward one space. I think both of you are staying put. If you do not have an illness or other impairment, move forward. Brian, I think that's you. All right, I'm moving you forward. If you speak your country's native language, move forward one space. Brian? All right. So Brian's making it to the food bounty. He made it. Sarah, it looks like you were able to move one space, right? Okay, so thank you for participating in that simulation with me. I want you to reflect on these questions. How did you feel during this exercise, given your persona? What do you notice about where people are on the board? How are you all connected to each other regardless of your position on the board? And then what questions does this exercise cause you to ask? So just think about those questions. If you feel like you want to unmute and share out any thinking, please do that, or you are welcome to type into the chat as well. Yes, thank you, Sarah. Sarah says the more privileges you have, the easier it is to move forward. Absolutely. And you guys could see that coming based on your persona, right? Absolutely. Okay, so we just engaged in an activity to really think about this question. Remember, this is our goal. How might we help reduce the 1.3 billion tons of food wasted every year? Okay, so here's what you're going to do. We are going to put you in a breakout room. You are going to be in a breakout room together, Sarah and Brian. And here is what your task is. So you are going to define, you're going to create a point of view statement for this question. Again, you're solving. How might we help reduce the 1.3 billion tons of food wasted every year? So that is a huge problem, right? So we need to narrow it in a little bit more. And so you all are going to decide how you're going to narrow it in. So you are going to choose who are your stakeholders, who are your users. You're going to determine that, and then you're going to say they need a way to blank, right? What do they need to solve this question, to answer this question? So that, what is the impact, okay? So that's kind of your sentence frame that you're using. So I provided an example on this slide. I chose grocery stores as my stakeholders. You can choose a different stakeholder group. But grocery stores need a way to maximize the amount of food purchased or received before expiration so that food is not wasted and those in need have greater access to groceries. So again, I'm choosing my stakeholder as grocery stores because I know that grocery stores have a ton of waste, right? Legally, they can't sell things past an expiration date, whether or not it's still good or not, right? And it's very hard to determine needs of customers and the correct quantities. And so again, they need a way to maximize the amount of food purchased or received before expiration so that food is not wasted. And if we could solve that, people would have greater access to groceries who need it, and we would help reduce the 1.3 billion tons of food wasted every year. Okay, so you are using this sentence frame to create your own point of view statement as a group. All right, so we're going to put you into breakout rooms. You will have, let me just check timing here. You will have about 4 minutes to draft your point of view statement together. Are there any questions before we get started? All right, the last thing is that I am going to have you post your point of view statement on our shared Jamboard. So your Jamboard looks like this. You both will be in breakout room number 1. And to post, you're gonna go to the left-hand side here, this toolbar, click on a sticky note, and type in your point of view statement. All right, 4 minutes, here we go. All right, so welcome back, everyone. So as you were typing on your Jamboard, I was seeing some amazing things. So I see the food insecure need a way to secure food so that people with food and money need to be mobilized to help, like food drives, fundraisers, or ways to repurpose or share. Yes, so already kind of thinking of solutions, which is wonderful. Okay, so you just defined your point of view statement and what your goal is. Now I'm going to give you a couple minutes to ideate. So really this is some time to have big shoot the moon thinking, and any idea that pops into your brain, throw it on your Jamboard. This is really important when we think about doing this with students. It really is an opportunity for them to be creative and not have any filters, right? Share their best thinking. It's all about, I always say it's all about quantity over quality when you're brainstorming, right? It may not be the most fully baked idea, but it may spark something for someone else. So throw it out there. And so here's what you're gonna do. In your breakout rooms, we're gonna put you back in your breakout room for 4 minutes. We had someone else join us. John joined us. So maybe catch John up on what you all have done, and then spend a couple minutes just throwing ideas out on your Jamboard. So anything that pops into your head, how are you gonna solve this point of view statement? I already see some ideas coming through, which is perfect, all right? 4 minutes in your breakout room, and then we'll come back together as a whole group. Here we go. All right, so welcome back. So you have-
Did John not want to join us? Did we scare him away?
Did he jump off?
Sorry. Yeah, he didn't come. He didn't want to meet with us. Oh, I feel bad.
I wonder if
anyway,
there's an internet connection or an internet issue. Sometimes that happens when we open the breakout rooms.
oh, well, hopefully he'll come back and not think he was kicked out. But I've been enjoying talking to Brian, so I'll let you keep going. Sorry.
Okay, awesome. So you guys you've defined what your goal is, right? You've set that point of view statement. You've begun to ideate some solutions for that point of view statement. And now your job is to really prototype, right? So how would you solve this solution? And what's great about prototyping is it really embraces this both and thinking, right? We don't have to go with this solution or with this solution, but maybe how do we combine solutions to create something new? I always love with my students, really talking about how prototyping is just that. It's your first shot, right? It does not need to be perfect. It does not need to be pretty. You use the materials at hand and have a physical representation of your idea. We would use lots of recycled materials. I took my students, my 5th graders, to Ball Aerospace for a field experience, and they could not believe that engineers were using cardboard and Coke bottles to create their prototypes. They're like, that's what we use. And we had this great conversation of absolutely, right? Of course you do, because prototyping should be quick, it should be easy, it should be cheap, because it's your first shot, right? You're just increasing and iterating from there. So I'm gonna give you all about 6 minutes in your group to prototype a solution. Now, because you're virtual, you are not gonna have a physical solution, but you can really map this out on your Jamboard. So feel free to get creative. You don't have to just use sticky notes on your Jamboard, but maybe you incorporate text or visuals or videos or images into your Jamboard to show your solution. All right, so 6 minutes to start to combine some ideas and really solution generate for your point of view statement. Here we go. Were you guys cut off? I heard a,
Yes, because I was like, oh, just for sake of time, I'll put this in real quick, and then we ran out of time.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, we would love to hear, again, prototype's first shot, right? So it doesn't have to be perfect, but what did you all come up with?
I think we were kind of going with 2 ideas that we were sort of trying to prototype, and we got the middle piece of the 3-step process for our prototype going on there. But we thought that working with restaurants to like get their unusable food to the pantries or kitchens, or like, and using maybe a meal delivery service to make that happen. And so there's our panel truck that's like going to get the stuff to the people who need it, get the food to the people who need it. But there's sort of up at the top, there was going to be kind of this multi-tiered, like you've got to find out the restaurants who have extra food and the groceries that might have the bad produce, the meal delivery services that have stuff they can't use, and making sure it doesn't just get thrown away. Helen, add anything else, because you have those really good thoughts around that last idea, if I missed something.
Oh no, yeah, that sounds good.
Awesome. So it sounds like that's a wonderful idea. You guys kind of thought through how you would begin to reduce this waste, right? This 1.3 billion tons of waste that's wasted every single year. And so wonderful. So you actually just walked through a design sprint, right? You did each process of the design sprint. So normally we would really want students to test out their solutions, right? Get feedback, make changes, make iterations, and then go back and manipulate their prototype. And then again, test it, right? And test it specifically for their users, for who they identified as their stakeholders. But for today, for sake of time, and because we don't have our actual stakeholders here, we're not going to test. But I do want us to spend some time reflecting. So think about, how does this design sprint feel? What was challenging about it? Maybe what was satisfying? What did you learn? And then how might you apply something similar into your own setting or context? So I'll give you about 1 minute on your own to think about this before we share out. So take a minute just to think about one of your answers for these questions, and then in a second we'll share out. Feel free, either unmute yourself and share out your thinking, or type into the chat your answer to one of these questions. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that. I felt uncomfortable because I knew there were no right answers. Why did that make you feel uncomfortable, Sarah? I'd love to know more.
I was that high achieving kid in school who just wanted to do the bare minimum to get the grade I was after. Mm-hmm. And I was very disengaged from school. And so, and I used to see my own students doing the same, like, you know, but then they'd light up. And that's kind of what happened here too. So at first I felt uncomfortable, but then, you know, you get to talking and it's like, oh, I'm hearing about these really cool stories, and we can do this, and this is fun. So.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up. I had a group of educators involved in implementing equity-centered design thinking in their own classrooms. And so I challenged them. I said, all right, this week, do something, right? Do a sprint or a challenge in your own classroom. And when they came back, I said, you know, how did it go? And one teacher specifically was like, oh, it was awful. And I was like, well, why was it awful? And she said, because for an hour and a half, my kids just followed me around the room and were like, is this right? Is this right? Is this right? Did I do it correctly? And so I think you bring up this great point of, it's a mind shift for our students, right? Because there are no right answers. The purpose of this is they are solution generating and creating something new. And so there isn't a right way to do it. And sometimes that does feel uncomfortable for students, right? They like to kind of know where they stand and where they're at. But if we want to create these innovators and these problem solvers, then we have to get them used to being uncomfortable with no right answers. Thank you, Sarah, so much for bringing that up. I see, Brian, you put in the chat, it felt a little rushed as we had small segments of time to work with. Yes, I think that is wonderful to bring up. Sometimes that's good, right? And sometimes it's not so good. I worked with students who feel super rushed and they get overwhelmed by that. But then I also see the importance, and design thinking really talks about moving fast, right? Having a bias towards action. And sometimes that is really important, especially when we think in terms of students, because we know sometimes students are going to take the amount of time you give them, right? So if you give them 20 minutes to do a task or you give them 5, they might accomplish the same thing within that time limit. So thank you for bringing that up, Brian. I'm also looking in the chat. Sam says, can it also be comforting to know that there aren't any right answers? Yes, absolutely. That it's not right or wrong, right? You are just brainstorming. And I think that a lot of our students who struggle in traditional schools really come alive when they are working in this sort of process or this model, because there aren't right answers. And that sometimes takes the pressure off, right? It's very low stakes. Brian also sharing, having others to put ideas felt supportive. Yes, this collaborative nature is really important. Teamwork. I love hearing about the work Brian does with students and the work his church does to repurpose food. Ooh, so there were some connections individually. I love that. That is awesome. We see kids who aren't high achievers thrive when they have authentic problems to solve. Absolutely, absolutely. And Helen says, I find myself being comforted that there aren't right answers. I teach high school English and I love finding the gray spaces in literature with students. I could also see this process being applicable with my students' senior capstone project. Ooh, I love that. Solving those real world problems, right? Awesome. So thank you all for sharing out and engaging in that activity. So again, you all just walk through an equity-centered design thinking sprint. Typically, when we talk about design thinking, we look at it with these 5 components, right? If you were to Google design thinking, this is probably something that would come up. And I've heard all types of educators share out how this process is similar to other things that we use, right? It's similar to things like the scientific process or the writing process, very similar to the engineering process. However, what makes design thinking different is that it's rooted in empathy, right? You aren't solving, the purpose is not to solve separate of users, of stakeholders, but to solution generate and to solve with stakeholders alongside them. And I'm going to take it a step further, is that equity-centered design thinking actually isn't 5 components. You see equity-centered design thinking with 7 components. And really the purpose of this is that a couple years ago, there was a lot of criticism around design thinking because people said, well, how can you really empathize if you haven't walked in somebody's shoes? And so we began to explore equity-centered design thinking, which really adds 2 components, this notice and this reflect phase. And noticing is all about noticing yourself, right? What you bring to the table, that we all have different perspectives, experiences, biases, and that plays into our solution generation. And then also to reflect on how your own narrative, your own story plays into that solution generation. And so oftentimes we see design thinking and equity-centered design thinking in this linear format, but it really isn't linear, right? It really is not a process that's saying first you do this and then you do this. It can be used that way, but it really is more cyclical, right? Equity-centered design thinking, you should be constantly noticing what you bring to the table and reflecting on how that plays into your solutions, into your prototypes, into your ideas. And sometimes, right, design thinking is all about iteration. So oftentimes solutions will be generated or ideas will be thrown out on the table, and then students or yourself, if you're using this process, will say, wait a second, maybe we didn't define the problem correctly, right? Maybe we looked at symptoms to a problem instead of root causes of a problem. And how do we dig deeper into some of those root causes? How do we go back and empathize with our stakeholders, right? How do we go back and test and gain feedback and then iterate again and change up our prototype? So it really is meant to be more cyclical. I'm going to give a couple examples of the differences between design thinking and equity-centered design thinking. So I'm going to give you a second to read these examples on your own. Go ahead and read that slide. And then go ahead and type into the chat or unmute yourself if you feel comfortable and share out what is the difference between design thinking and equity-centered design thinking. Based off of these examples, how would you explain the difference between these two things? Thank you, Helen. Helen says, it seems like equity-centered design thinking is rooted in real-world, people-oriented problems. I love that. Yes, it's human-centered. Absolutely. Brian says, DT seems focused on a product and ECDT is a bit more of a process. Yes, that is awesome. That is one of the mindsets of ECDT, is be mindful that it's a process. It's not about the end goal or the outcome. It's about going along the process and learning throughout the process. Wonderful, awesome. Yes, and so when we think about equity-centered design thinking, it's really important that we think about how are we solving alongside stakeholders, right? It isn't, if you introduce this to your students, it isn't about students solving for somebody else, absent of their users, but it's really thinking about how do they design alongside, right? So that is kind of what we're going to explore. And in our Equity-Centered Design Thinking Institute, we'll spend more time diving into the mindsets, but today we're going to talk about just two of the mindsets of equity-centered design thinking, and that is creative confidence and then iteration. Iterate, 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 right? And so we are going to engage in an activity today called Disruptus. This is something, if you've ever played this before, it's a great game. You can order it online, and it's actually a physical game, but they have a virtual version as well. And so we're gonna play that virtual version today, but we're gonna practice our creative confidence. You have to practice creativity, right? I'm sure you are all familiar with the longitudinal study that was done on a couple kiddos. And what they found is that over time, students lose creativity, right? For whatever reason. That kindergartners are scoring at genius levels when you ask them, what do you do with a paperclip? They can come up with hundreds of ideas. But when you ask an 18-year-old, they can come up with a couple. Right? And so really thinking about how do we practice creativity? It takes practice. And then how do we practice iteration? And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to play this game Disruptus as a group, but it's also linked in your graphic organizer if you want to check it out on your own time. So here's the way it works. In person, you would draw a card. There are 4 cards. There's create, improve, transform, and Disruptus. Or excuse me, and disrupt. And so you would choose a card, and then you would have a separate pile of cards, and you would choose one of those cards that has an image on it. Some of the images are very clear. Some of them you have to interpret a little bit more. And so today, instead of choosing a card, we're going to roll a dice. So we're going to roll a dice to see what action we're going to do. And then you are going to follow that action card based off of the images that you choose. So it will make more sense in a second. So I am going to show an example first. So I'm going to roll this dice, and it's going to tell me what action card I'm going to get. So I got create. So under create, it says using 2 cards. So I get to choose 2 cards. Take any number of elements from each card and use these to create a new object or idea. So again, I'm going to take a drink of water here. Some of the greatest things have been created by combining multiple ideas. We think about, you know, an iWatch, right? Is an iPhone and a watch put together. So simple when you think about it, but it's really just taking 2 separate ideas and combining them. And so I'm going to show an example. So here's the cards. I am going to choose, I'm just choosing randomly here. I'm going to choose and again, I have to choose 2 because that was the action card I drew. I'm going to choose a hair dryer and a steering wheel. And the element of the hair dryer that I'm choosing is that, oh gosh, this is hard. I think I should have chosen two different cards. So the element of the hair dryer is that it blows out hot air and it can blow out cold air. And the steering wheel, how I'm going to combine those two things is that we have steering wheels that heat up, but sometimes your hands get really sweaty, right? And it's not great. So I would have a steering wheel that has hot air and cold air because sometimes you need to cool down your hands, not just heat them up. All right. So that's an example. I rolled create. So I had to choose two cards and combine them. All right. So we are going to do this together. I'm going to roll the dice. So here's our action card. Our action card is disrupt. So on the disrupt section, it says, look at the picture, grasp what the purpose is, and come up with a completely different way to achieve the same purpose. Okay? So Helen, I'm going to call on you. What picture do you choose for the group to disrupt?
Dishwasher.
Okay, awesome. So our job, we're going to take 1 minute, think about what the purpose of a dishwasher is. And let me go back so I'm saying it correctly. So look at the picture, grasp the purpose. So the purpose of the dishwasher, and come up with a completely different way to achieve the same purpose. All right, you have 1 minute to think about how you would redefine the purpose of a dishwasher. Here we go. All right, wrap up your thinking. Time is up. Okay, let's hear some of those ideas. Helen, Brian, Sam, any ideas you want to share with the group?
I was having trouble coming up with anything that wasn't some other form of a dishwasher I've already seen.
Mm-hmm.
So I was struggling with that one.
Yeah, that's okay, Brian. I was having the same problem. My husband and I never run the dishwasher. We do it like once every 2 weeks just because we want it to be full, right? We don't want to waste water. And so we do a lot of hand washing of our dishes. But I was thinking it would be cool if there was like a mini dishwasher, right? Like you just have 3 or 4 items, you put them in there, it does a quick little cycle and it's done. So you don't have to hand wash. But I kind of already think that exists in like a sanitizer kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about some sort of a rack, that you just put the things on over the sink and then you spray them down. That was really just kind of like hand washing, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Helen, Sam, did you guys have any other ideas?
The only thing I was thinking was, have you seen, and there's no science behind this, but have you seen that instead of an iron, there's that anti-wrinkle spray?
Yeah.
What if there was some kind of powder or spray that you could just use the dishes to achieve that purpose instead of having a big hulking machine?
Yeah. I like it, Sam. Helen, what about you?
I was imagining some kind of contraption with like 2 scrubbers.
Yeah.
And so you'd like stick a plate in there and it would scrub it. And I mean, you'd still have to like rinse it yourself, but the scrubbing is the hard part. So
yeah, almost like a car wash is what I'm
okay,
like
yeah, like
car wash for your plate. Yes, I love that. I think we have some pretty good ideas. Okay, so let's do one more. I'm going to roll the dice again. Let's see what action card we get. All right, create. So again, this one we have to choose 2 images and we are choosing an element and combining them. All right, so Brian, choose 2 images for the group. Oh, Brian, you're muted.
Sorry.
No
There.
problem.
Maybe the shopping cart and the hammock.
shopping cart and the hammock. All right, think about the elements from those two things and how we could combine them. You have 1 minute. Here we go. All right, time is up. Let's hear those brilliant ideas. How did you combine the premise of a shopping cart and a hammock and make it into a new item?
I'm not sure why I chose the hammock, but the only thing I could come up with really was modifying the shopping cart so that you could actually rig a hammock into it or something like that, so that you wheeled it around and then you could relax in it whenever you got where you were going.
Yeah, that's awesome, Brian. Love it.
I got the same idea as Brian, but then I thought it was kind of like Wall-E-like. Like just imagine like going around the aisles of Walmart in a hammock where someone pushes you around and you just go that.
Yes, make shopping a lot easier. Helen, what about you?
I thought about that too. And I also was, I don't know, I also thought about like, there's like those metal chairs that look like a shopping cart. I was like, what if you had that, but it was a hammock? I don't know how comfortable it'd be, but it would be very like design fashionable. So
Yes, I like it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, so a shopping cart holds things, and I'm thinking like when I've been in a hammock, I always want things to do, right? Like I'm reading a book or I want a cold drink or whatever it may be. So maybe it's like a hammock that is like more of a bag that kind of unfolds so you could carry things out, right? You could, wherever you're setting up your hammock, I was picturing the beach. But it's a backpack, right? So you're carrying things and then it kind of unfolds and turns into a hammock. So then you have all your items with you. Awesome. So this is a great game. Again, you can play it in person physically, but then there's also this virtual version. But it just practices some of those mindsets of being creative, being iterative. When you play this with students, I've always had them matched up kind of in teams, and then they add on to each other's ideas. And we talk about the purpose of iteration and practicing those creative muscles in your brain. And so just a great one to do to kind of practice the solution-oriented piece. I'm going to skip past these questions just for time's sake, because I really want to give you all time to think about how this applies to your role and what you do on a daily basis. And so you have two options. Sam is going to put you into a breakout room together so you can talk through ideas, but you are going to be in that breakout room for 10 minutes. And you can do two things in this 10-minute time frame. You have access to this Padlet. Sam's going to put the link to this Padlet into the chat. And you'll notice that on this Padlet, there's kind of two different things that you'll see. You'll see some examples of lessons that are honestly more design thinking focused. And then you'll see some articles, some recent news articles. So you can either explore some of the design thinking lessons and think about how you would make them equity-centered design thinking challenges, or you can explore some of the recent articles and create your own equity-centered design thinking challenge. All right, so this is really a 10 minutes of application time for you to think through how this applies to your specific role. There is also an equity-centered planning template that is in your graphic organizer, and also we're linking it in the chat as well. But this may be helpful to think through, how might you have students empathize? How might you have them define the problem? How would they ideate, right? How would they generate solutions? So this may be helpful. Use it if it is. If it isn't, maybe you have your own idea of how this would apply in your setting. But 10 minutes in breakout rooms to explore either creating your own design challenge or taking a current design thinking challenge and turning it into an equity-centered design thinking challenge. All right, 10 minutes in your breakout room. Here we go. Welcome back, everyone. All right, I would love to hear, what did you think about or talk about? How is this going to apply to your setting or your context or your role? Let's just hear really quickly, Brian and Helen, if you want to share out about 30 seconds of what you're thinking.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how he started on it, but we got looking at sports and games and such, and then just the I don't want to call it the roadblock, I guess, for a lot of people of just the cost of buying the equipment that you needed for sports and stuff. And so I'll hush and let Helen pick it up from there.
Yeah, so Brian had good ideas. We were kind of looking at the like students create a sport based on what they have. And he said that he had done that actually and gotten some really interesting results from kids. And then we also thought about the idea of like kind of a library of equipment or like a co-op of some kind where, you know, people could check out the equipment they need instead of having to buy it all themselves.
Awesome. So you guys thought about presenting it back to the students and having them solve this problem, but then you also were kind of generating solutions. I love that. That is awesome. And all around kind of this point of view statement of how do we make sports more accessible to all students. That is wonderful. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing that out. Okay, so a couple things before we wrap up tonight's session. In the chat is our evaluation link. So when you pull that up, it looks like this. You will choose me as your facilitator. You will answer a couple questions here. For our purposes, I'm just going to write test. But I want to show you this is an important thing. So make sure you're paying attention to this because I don't want you to miss out on it. After you click submit, make sure that you click on this second link. That's our attendance link, and it's how we send out certificates of completion. And so the session that you attended today, you can write in Spotlight, Intro to ECDT. All right, so that you'll fill that out, and then you'll get a certificate from MindSpark Learning for attending today's session. All right, I'm gonna also put that in the chat. And then the other thing that I want to draw your attention to is our Equity Center Design Thinking Institute. So I mentioned this at the beginning. If you're interested in diving more into this process, thinking about how it applies to your setting and context, please join us this summer. It's a virtual institute, so it's open to anyone. And we are putting the link to that into the chat. It's also linked in your graphic organizer. We also have a new series that is starting in about 2 weeks. It's called the Engage Leadership Series, and it is really focused on how do you as a leader develop some of your leadership skills and incorporate some feedback from different stakeholders. So if you are interested in that, please check it out. And then finally, we have a Colorado Education Accelerator. I'm not sure if any of you are from Colorado. I think Brian is based off of his CSU sweatshirt. But if you are located in Colorado, you can participate in this program. It is about a 5-month leadership program where you bring a school team and you really dive into a problem of practice. So we currently have 2 EAs going on. We have schools who are looking at everything from, you know, how do they improve their culture? How do they look at student agency within their system, to how do they increase testing scores? So you choose a problem of practice and work through that through our program. And so if you are interested in any of those programs, please check them out. Sam is putting links to them in the chat, and they are also linked on your graphic organizer. Once you have filled out today's evaluation and the attendance form, you are free to jump off. We thank you so much for joining us today. We know that it is late and probably a busy week and a busy day. So thank you all for the amazing work that you do for students every single day. Reach out if you have any questions, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you for this.
Thank you all.
Thank you.